Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of eShe TV. I'm Ekta Kapoor, and this is where we talk to interesting women and learn something new about the world that we live in. So today is our first episode, and today we're going to talk about how can we stop child abandonment. Living in a country like India, none of us are immune to the sight of children on the streets begging, abandoned by their parents. We read the news reports about a little fetus being abandoned in a dustbin, or exploitation happening in child shelters and orphanages around India. So obviously, these children are not going to be living optimal lives. So what is the alternative? Can we give them a better future? Can there be a better way for these children to live their lives rather than at the at the complete bottom of society where nobody cares for them? So Smriti Gupta has some ideas about that, and I'm going to invite her onto the show now. So welcome to the show, Smriti.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you, Ekta.
I'm going to introduce Smriti before we move ahead. Smriti is a child rights activist based in Pune. She's also a partnerships and marketing professional. She is the co founder of an organization called Where Are India's Children? We're going to talk to her about that a little later. And Smriti is also running a campaign to raise awareness about better alternatives to child abandonment. So we're going to talk to her about that as well. As I mentioned, she is currently based in Pune and she studied at the Indian School of Business, Carnegie Mellon University, and the Cooper Union. Smriti has worked at various technology companies such as Wikimedia Foundation, PayPal for eBay, and Synopsys. So, welcome on the show, Smriti, and we're happy to have you here. So, let's get started. If anybody has any questions, please leave them in the comments box and we could take them up later. So, Smriti, tell us about your organization, WAIC, and what exactly is the focus of your work?
So thank you, Ekta. Our organization is essentially focused on abandoned and orphaned children. So as per a UN report for 2016, there are about 30 million abandoned and orphaned kids in India. But if you start looking for, where are these kids, what's happening to them, you won't find many answers. Many of these kids may be absorbed by their communities. Many may be in child shelters, in the streets. Some of these children may be trafficked. But what we do know is that these children are definitely not getting on the path to get into the legal adoption pool in India. So
Mhm.
today, the number of children pan India, this is for across India, in the legal adoption pool in our country are 2,000. That's less than 0.1% of the millions of abandoned and orphaned children. And if you contrast that with the number of waiting parents, which is 30,000, so it turns that convention on the head where we say, oh, people are not willing to bring children who are not biologically related to them in their lives. That's not true. Our society is evolving, people are adopting kids, but kids have to first reach the legal adoption pool. And and that's where that path itself needs to be functional, and that's what we focus on, how to make that path functional for these kids.
Right. And you've been advocating adoption, especially for special needs children. In fact, Smriti has also written an article about that in eShe magazine, about why parents who are looking to adopt should consider special needs children first. And Smriti herself, let me add, has adopted two daughters. So tell us, Smriti, tell us about the scenario of adoption in the country and how long does it take for a prospective parent to go through the process, and what has your experience been in this regard?
Sure. So that's a big question. As I'll break it up into parts. So let me put it this way: the adoption itself has two parts. The first part is when a child who is abandoned or orphaned, or a child who does not have a primary caregiver who wants the child. That child has to first enter the legal adoption process, legal adoption pool. And once the child is there, then parents can go through the adoption process to adopt these children. So
Right.
what we have done as a country is we have made part two, we have made that part quite streamlined and quite transparent. So as a parent today, if somebody wants to adopt, there's a centralized system that comes under Kara. It's an online process. The steps are very clearly defined. So the paperwork, the process part itself, I would say is quite easy and uncomplicated. But what does happen is, if you look at part one, the part one of children coming into the legal adoption pool, right? When kids are not coming into the legal adoption pool, that's when, if you're an parent who wants to adopt, that's where you'll be waiting for a child. That's where the match between a parent and a child, that's where it's delayed. That's where the wait time comes in, is because it's because there are not, in fact, enough children to be matched with the number of parents who are willing to adopt. Now, and that largely applies to kids who fall under the normal category. That's the definition for children who don't have any known health condition. And I do want to specifically talk about special needs. So what happens?
Right.
So currently, if you look at the statistics of children who are legally available for adoption, more than 50% of those kids have some sort of a special need. And it can range from mild to moderate to perhaps something that requires a little bit more care. So there's a range of it. A lot of kids fall, more than 50% of the kids fall in that category. And these are the kids, where a lot of people don't look at. So among a lot of waiting parents, we get parents waiting for the normal category kids, but we need people to also adopt and think about, consider children who have special needs. And through personal experience, I've very closely seen that any child who gets adopted, how amazingly they thrive. I have seen like kids with special need where the health condition significantly improves, where the parent even hasn't done anything yet, where the parent hasn't even taken them for the first doctor's appointment, because that idea of being with a family, of being cared for, of feeling that you belong to somebody and that you are safe has such a positive impact on children, that a lot of their mental, physical, psychological attributes, right? They start evolving, they start changing as soon as they're with a family. So every time I talk to somebody about adoption, I always ask them, please consider special need adoption. You can look at, all the kids in the adoption pool, but do also consider special need. And even though, we are not didn't specifically ask me, another category of kids in our country that find it hard to get adopted are preteens and teens. So I'm talking about children above 10 years of age. So again, when I talk to people who are perhaps at that stage of their life where kids are older or kids have gone to college and they may be interested in adoption, I recommend to them to consider kids who are in their preteen and teen years.
Right. And actually, there was something that we discussed before the show that a lot of these children are actually born healthy, but they end up with, physical or mental disability or special needs because of the circumstances in which they've been abandoned. So, as a society, we are the ones who wronged them, and it's up to us also to fix it. So, tell us, what is your new Change.org campaign all about?
So you just touched upon that a little bit, Ekta. So what's happening, again, as I mentioned, that kids in our country are not entering the legal adoption process. Kids who need
Right.
to enter it are not entering it. And
Right.
at the same time, all of us, continuously see these news reports about children being abandoned or, dumped in garbage bins, left at roads. And a lot of these children get injured. A lot of these children get killed when they are unsafely abandoned. And even if the child doesn't get physically injured, imagine sort of the psychological impact on a child of being
Right.
left on the road for hours. So,
Yeah.
as you said, we are damaging these kids, and
Yeah.
we are somehow taking away from their physical and mental well-being
Right.
by poorly abandoning them. So, what our camp, but see, it doesn't have to be this way. Our
Yeah.
country actually has the infrastructure where people don't have to abandon kids. Our
Right.
laws allow parents or guardians to safely, legally, and anonymously surrender a child at a specialized adoption agency.
Right.
So you can do that, and the child will safely enter the legal adoption process and get a new family.
Right.
Except people don't know that. There is no public awareness around it. So, so we looked at, okay, how do we change this? How are people getting to know about abandonment? Well, through the news. So just like, when you report about perhaps suicide, you have a note at the bottom saying, hey, here is some help if you need help in this scenario. Or if you're talking about the Me Too movement, right? Sometimes these articles also provide you resources of where to go if you're facing that challenge. So
Yeah.
similarly, when news media talks about child abandonment, child trafficking, or infanticide, they should include in that article information about the safer alternatives. They should tell the public that this child didn't have to be abandoned. The child could have been safely surrendered at a specialized adoption agency, and this is how you find one. This is you.
Right.
This is how you find the one nearest to you. So
Yeah.
that basic information, we want that to be included in every article about child abandonment, and that's what our Change.org petition is about. This petition is addressed towards news media companies, the big and the small news media in India. Like everybody needs to do this. We are requesting them to change their editorial policy and require all their reporters and editors and production teams and anybody involved in newsmaking to include information about safe surrender at a specialized adoption agency in every article about child abandonment. So that's our petition. We are really hoping. I mean, we have seen a lot of people signing it. In 3 weeks, we had some 22,000 signatures. So it's resonating with people, and we see a lot of comments from people who sign it saying, "Hey, this is so obvious. We should be
Yeah.
doing this much." Right. So
Yeah.
so the goal of the petition is that it will get noticed by the news media, and that they will make the simple change we are asking for.
Right. So you were saying that, children are being abandoned. They end up in shelters or they end up in orphanages. But isn't it logical that the shelters or the orphanages should be handing them over to adoption agencies? I mean, what's stopping them? Why aren't they doing it already?
So I should say, I think in districts where the district officers are
Mm,
aware or well trained, they may take an abandoned child and take the child to a specialized adoption agency, which would be
okay.
the right thing to do. But as
Mm,
you said, these kids could end up in the various shelters, etc., which are not putting the kids in the legal adoption pool, and not
yeah.
just the kids who are abandoned. This applies widely to a lot of children.
Mm,
Sometimes parents may not, or relatives may not abandon a kid. They may just leave the child at a shelter forever.
mm, mm,
Recently, there was this heartbreaking, just 2 days ago, after we talked about this session, there has
yeah.
been this case in Telangana where a girl, an orphan girl, was left by her relatives at a shelter. The
Mm,
girl was in the shelter for 5 years. She recently passed away because she suffered abuse at the shelter. And then
okay.
when she went back to her relatives, they abused her. And it's a big case right now. I think the government is looking at it and trying to figure out what went wrong, what could have prevented it. But if you look at the situation, an orphan is in a shelter. The relatives don't want her. Then why is she sitting in a shelter? And you'll see this story across shelters in India. They have kids who are orphaned, they have kids who are abandoned, but the kids spend their lifetime in a shelter. So to answer your question, why do these shelters not put the kids in the legal adoption pool? There are
Mm,
many reasons. I'll share the two main ones.
mm,
The first reason is how currently the shelter structure in India is incentivized. They are
okay.
incentivized to keep children.
Okay.
So they get donations for it. They get, many of them get government funding for it.
Mm,
So their model is to keep these kids. They're not thinking about the child,
mm,
they're not thinking that the best interest of the child is in going to a family. So they're not putting the effort to
mm,
say to in declaring the kids legally free for adoption. So our country has process which works at every district level in India,
mm,
and the process, it's a very streamlined process. The shelter can take the child to a child welfare committee and say, this child is either orphaned or abandoned and
mm,
should be considered for the legal adoption process, and the
yeah.
local committee will do the required steps, the
Right.
required guidelines and steps. They'll follow them and declare the child free for adoption, which is
Mm,
when the child, comes under the umbrella
adoption.
of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
legal adoption,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the parents can adopt the child.
Mm.
But again, shelters are not doing that because they're not incentivized to do it. That's not their business model. Their
They're
model is to keep.
incentivized to keep the child rather than surrender the
Yeah.
child.
And I do want to say, there are good shelters out there. There are good shelters who make a lot of effort, but there are also average shelters. There are also bad shelters, and irrespective of the quality of the shelter, that can't be a child's home.
Mm,
So
mm.
for a child to
And
grow
in
up
the
in a
meantime,
shelter,
there are thousands and thousands of parents actually
exactly.
waiting for a child to adopt.
Yeah. Can you imagine there is a waiting list of parents right now to adopt a child up to 10 years of age?
Mm,
So normally we would say, oh, a 2-year-old child, they won't get adopted, or a 6-year-old won't get adopted, or an 8-year-old. But there's a waiting list for parents for children up to 10 years of age. Why
that they don't
aren't
get
we?
them.
But they don't get them, and why aren't we letting these children reach the parents?
Mm,
So incentivization is one problem, and I think second problem, and this is a problem not just that belongs to shelters, it belongs to all of
mm.
us. It's
Okay.
mindset.
Mm,
It's our mindset. As a country, we do not appreciate, we do not understand a child's critical right to family. You
mm,
know, how many of us walk into shelters, look at 50 kids, and say, oh wow, they're doing such great work. The children are being fed, the children are being kept safe. And I have been that person. I have walked into shelters and I have gone in and I have been really appreciative of, the
mm,
quote unquote charity work of taking care of these kids who are orphaned or abandoned or very poor or children of parents, who can't take care of them. But how many of us ask that shelter, uh, hey, how many of these kids are orphaned? And if they are, how much effort have you put in making this
mm,
child legally adoptable? We are not asking
mm,
these questions ourselves.
mm,
We think it's okay for a poor child, for a disenfranchised child, for a vulnerable child
mm.
to not have parents, to sit in a shelter, depend upon somebody for 3 meals a day,
Yeah,
and get out of the shelter at the very bottom rung of the
yeah,
society, right? We have normalized that.
yeah.
So all of us have to change our mindset. All of us have to honor the child's right to a family.
And they say, yeah, it's true that the children are the future. And looking
Right.
at the way that we completely write off unwanted children, I don't know what that says about the future of the country. But we should be treating these children as treasures. We should be treating them like, they're our future. None of us is going out of our way to invest in these kids. So I think as a civil society, like you said, we all have to wake up. We have to hold the government bodies accountable, shelters accountable. We have to ask, why aren't these children reaching adoption pools? The more we ask, the more awareness is created, the more likely these shelters are going to take action. So,
Exactly.
everyone, you can see Smriti's petition at the bottom, change.org, Safe Surrender. Please sign it so that we can create more awareness about this, and so that media organizations are asked to carry a line at the bottom of every article about child abandonment, about the safer alternatives, and how children can be put in adoption pools. So, thank you, Smriti, for being with us here today on the first very episode of eShe TV. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And please do tune in on Fridays at 5 p.m. And we're going to have a new session where we meet a woman, a very interesting woman, and we learn something new about life. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you all. I'll see you next week at 5. Bye.